Map, go on your Bloomberg terminal, 30-day look. Vessels, of course, on your screens in blue. This is the Strait of Hormuz, Persian Gulf, Oman Gulf, major exporting hub, of course, in Iran, which was attacked on the weekend, and some reporting today that from Axios that the U.S. president is weighing a seizure of some other assets in that part of the world. We're also getting some lines coming through out of Dubai and the international airport there being temporarily suspended about 30 minutes back. And we're also trying to figure out really what tanker traffic is really like, given a lot of reports, right? If you're Chinese or Russian linked, you get free passage. Everything but American and Israeli also get free passage. On the Bloomberg terminal, you do have some data on this. We're looking at 24-hour rolling data every 30 minutes. So suffice to say, if there's something there that is visible, that is moving, then this might be able to capture that. It's also worth pointing out, though, that some of the tankers in that part of the world have maybe turned off some of their signaling mechanisms in order to, of course, avoid. There's a lot of jamming that's taking place across GPS too, so that's also affecting the ability of folks to figure out really where things are in real time. But based on our understanding, it's effectively at about near zero as far as tanker traffic is concerned, whether that's the orange line is bidirectional. East to west is in blue, west to east is in yellow. But again, suffice to say, the headline here, Yvonne, tells you everything to know. And you are getting a lot more efforts, of course, on many sides to open up traffic there in that part of the world.
And it's interesting, if you read more from this Axios report of what President Trump wants to do when it comes to that export hub of Iran, which it did attack. So apart from just asking for a coalition of countries to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, he is also weighing a seizure of the critical oil depot on Karg Island. This would be a move that would require U.S. boots on the ground, according to Axios here, and if tankers remain bottled up in the Persian Gulf. So that's the latest on that front. Of course, we have to take a look at when it comes to the impact on China, right? And most of the economists and China watchers that we talked to have talked about, China's efforts to build out its energy sources is actually getting fresh momentum from this conflict in the Middle East. And Beijing is one of the largest global investors in power grids. And China was the fastest growing LNG market before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2020 triggered a surge in spot prices.
But Bloomberg Opinion columnist David Fickling says there's a lesson to be learned in Beijing's dash for gas. He joins us now, together with our reporter Dan Murtaugh, to talk us through this complex issue right now. David, let me start with you. Underscore the premise here for us.
Yeah, I think this is looking at I was looking at a very specific case, really, which is, some of the things that have caused these blue skies around Beijing in recent years. You remember, like 10 years ago, there was a lot of air pollution in northern China, especially in winter. One of the things that's really changed that is that since about 2017, there's been a lot of push for people in rural areas to stop burning coal in domestic furnaces to warm themselves in winter, and that's pushed people in several directions. One has been to electric heaters and some to heat pumps, but a lot of them have also been pushed to gas boilers. And that's actually caused real problems just in this past winter. We saw quite a lot of reports in January with some of these rural families. They were initially subsidised to install gas boilers. They were subsidised for the price of the gas, and those subsidies have gradually been removed because, of course, a lot of local governments in China are facing a lot of fiscal pressure. And that's left, some of these quite shocking reports out of, China of 2026, where you've got poor rural families who can't afford to heat their houses, who are, people who are having to sort of stand outside in the midday sun to get a little bit of warmth, and are just like having to rug up inside with extra layers of clothing. Now, I think that was a real mistake, because the costs of heat pumps, essentially, reverse cycle air conditioners, are not that much greater in a lot of these areas, about 20%. And really, a lot of people talk about gas as this sort of bridge to electrification. I think we saw in that Hebei winter gas crisis some of the problems for that. And of course, we're seeing spilling out of the crisis in the Middle East some of the problems for that much more broadly in the world.
Yeah, David, you certainly have highlighted some of the challenges in this whole transition. Dan, maybe you can step in and talk about how, what is being done now, right? This push to expand China's energy infrastructure, and when it comes to capacity in the power grid, what efforts are being done now?
Yeah, David's exactly right. Like, I think China has sort of realized that it was too reliant. It requires about 50% of its gas coming from overseas markets, about 70% of its oil coming from overseas markets. So it's really exposed to any gyrations in global prices. And now it looks at electricity, which is mostly coming from domestic sources: coal, nuclear, wind, solar, hydropower, all of which are produced in China. So it has a lot more control over the prices and supply there. And so it's been shifting its economy over the last couple of decades toward more and more electricity. Mostly you see that in EVs, but you can see it out in the countryside with these huge wind and solar farms. And that's all that is doing is requiring a much stronger grid build out. And so you have these companies like State Grid and Southern Grid that are backed by the government and are spending records amounts and selling bonds for 700 plus billion yuan last year to raise the money to build the power lines and the batteries that are needed to keep pace with all this new electricity demand that's here in China.
Yeah, so Dan, just to follow up on that, so you talked about financing. So clearly some of the SOEs have been tapping the markets, whether that's the banks or the debt markets. There's a lot of money that's pushing through into that. Talk to us, though, about the challenges that remain despite all that money being in place, really.
Yeah, I mean, the big challenge is not building the infrastructure, right? China's got incredible power construction companies, so the long-distance power lines, the battery storage plants, like they can build those things at scale. The challenge in China is really more about the underlying market that dictates how electrons are moved, where they go from, how flexible the supply can be with all these new sources of wind and solar that can be kind of anywhere geographically, but only on at certain amounts of time. And so the real challenge is going to be over the next couple of years to see if China's leaders can kind of slowly reform their market to create a more flexible system without kind of reducing any of the energy security promises they've made to their industries and people.
And David, you talked about the challenges. Do you get a sense that policymakers are trying to fix this in any way? And what's sort of the lesson to the rest of the world right now when it comes to trying to transition and make this big transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dan and I worked on a story a couple of years ago about the big solar manufacturer Tongwei. Their founder, I remember at the two sessions last year, was talking about, well, if we keep on this electrification process, we can stop oil imports within, I think, 2 decades, which obviously quite a long time. There's 2 decades of oil imports. But for a country the size of China, an oil importer the size of China, that's the sort of scale of ambition that's being talked about. And certainly for China's export industries as well. A lot of them, you're seeing a lot of like EVs and solar panels going to emerging markets that are still very dependent on fossil fuel imports. And we're going to see in South Asia, Southeast Asia, a lot of exposure to the effects of the crisis we're seeing in the Middle East. And China's standing there with the products, the sort of alternative products to fix that problem.